We're talking about an intriguing tale of a former police officer who believes that he's uncovered new evidence that links Peter Sutcliffe to a murder in this county. Now, this gentleman came to our attention about a week ago. Norfolk Police have been speaking to us about this, and we've also got a statement from Derbyshire Police as well, which we'll read out after we hear this interview. But you're jogging our memory by just reminding us of some of the horrific crimes that Peter Sutcliffe is culpable for.
That's right. The serial killer, now 67 and known as Peter Coonan, is detained at Broadmoor High Security Psychiatric Hospital in Berkshire. The former Bradford lorry driver received 20 life sentences in 1981 for murdering 13 women and attempting to murder 7 others in West Yorkshire between 1975 and 1981. When he was jailed, a judge recommended he served a minimum of 30 years behind bars. He used a hammer to attack his first victim on July the 5th, 1975. I've been trawling through the BBC archives, and here's some reports from 1975 and 1981.
Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, who was today sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of 13 women in the north of England. He was a young man so apparently ordinary that for 5 years he was able to elude the biggest manhunt in British criminal history. In that time, he drove freely over a wide area between Leeds and Manchester, attacking and murdering women.
This is BBC Radio Leeds. Good morning. It's Thursday, October the 20th, 1975. Police are investigating the discovery of a woman's body on a playing field in the Chapeltown district of Leeds. The woman, who hasn't yet been identified, was found by a milkman on his early delivery round. Murder squad detectives have been called in, and a press conference on the case will be held later this morning. The broadcast you've just heard marked the first killing in a campaign of violence and death by a man who's been dubbed the Yorkshire Ripper. For more than 5 years, women were afraid to go out alone in case they became his next victim.
You come up from behind them, they don't have a chance. You're not a man, you're a beast.
It's deserted on here at night now. There used to be loads walking up and down. Never seen anybody now.
Peter Sutcliffe went to the Roman Catholic Manor Road School at Cottingley near Bingley. One of his teachers was Mr. Louis Mungovin, now retired, who remembers him because he was such an unremarkable boy.
All I can remember is that he was a very quiet, obedient, respectful boy. He never shone in any way, and I would simply say that he was of average intelligence, but very quiet and reserved. And they showed interest, but he was reluctant to take any vocal part.
He didn't mix very well with the other children because he never had the physical capacity to do so. As a kid, he was always a bit on the light side. You know, he couldn't stand a lot of bullying and pushing around.
The doctors have had their say. The jury have made their decision. But in the opinion of another leading psychiatrist, it will be many years yet, and medical science will be much more advanced, before we even begin to understand what really went on in the dark mind of Peter Sutcliffe, the man history will remember as the Yorkshire Ripper.
BBC, 7 o'clock. This is the news. Peter William Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, is beginning a life sentence in jail after being found guilty of murdering 13 women by a jury at the Old Bailey. The jury weren't able to reach unanimous verdicts, but by a majority of 10 to 2, they returned after nearly 6 hours of deliberation to reject Sutcliffe's pleas of manslaughter on the ground of diminished responsibility. The judge recommended that Sutcliffe, who's 34, should not be released on license for at least 30 years. The judge, Mr. Justice Boreham, said it was an unusually long period, but Sutcliffe was an unusually dangerous man. The judge commended the assiduous performance of 2 police officers who arrested Sutcliffe after the biggest manhunt in British criminal history, while on humdrum and routine duty.
Now, a retired Norfolk police officer says he has evidence that could potentially link the Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe to a murder in this county. Chris Clark says he's looked at reports which are available to the public that he thinks could link the notorious murderer to cold cases here in Norfolk as well as in Derbyshire. The two cases include the unidentified headless body discovered at Cockley Clyde near Swaffham in 1974, as well as the 1974 killing of Wendy Sewell in Bakewell. Norfolk police have told us that nothing into their re-investigation into the Cockley Clyde case identified any links to Peter Sutcliffe. We also spoke to Derbyshire police. The Midlands Force have told this programme that they've got no evidence to connect the Yorkshire Ripper with the murder of Wendy Sewell. So why the interest by Mr. Clark, and why is he so keen to link Peter Sutcliffe to these unresolved famous cases? Earlier I put those very questions to him.
I've been researching unsolved cases from 1970 through to 1980 where there are definite characteristics of the later Ripper Peter Sutcliffe series. It started in 1971 in South Ruislip in London. I believe the evidence I have, albeit at the moment, is circumstantial. Overall, it does indicate a series of very frenzied murders on unaccompanied women in various parts of the country.
When it comes to Norfolk and our local area, are there any murders round here that you have looked at and thought there could well be a link back to Peter Sutcliffe or any other notorious killer?
As far as the headless body of Cockley Clay of 1974, I believe there is an indicator by the factor that Peter Sutcliffe was in Waterbeach, just 35 miles away, on around the very date that the pathologist concluded the lady met her death.
Yet Detective Inspector Andy Guy of Norfolk and Suffolk Major Investigation Team has ruled that out. Speaking to the EDP in October, he said there was nothing in the 3-year re-investigation into the headless body identified, and he also dismissed any links to Peter Sutcliffe.
I understand that that was in October. Norfolk Constabulary did not contact me, and I submitted the information I had just before Christmas in 2013. As far as I'm aware, they would not have had the evidence that Peter Sutcliffe was in Cambridgeshire.
How have you gone about trying to find out the movements of Peter Sutcliffe and then link them through to crimes, and also have a look at some of the original witness statements and some of the original evidence that was taken at the time?
Originally, I put the cases together with an overview that they may well have been his work, and then I read a book by Gordon Byrne called Somebody's Husband, Somebody's Son, where Gordon Byrne spent 3 years with the Sutcliffe family and friends building up a profile of Peter Sutcliffe.
He's an extraordinary character. He's a very depressing, very dark, very evil man. Through studying him, do you think you've got to know Peter Sutcliffe better, or actually is his mind so twisted that it's impossible to unravel?
I believe, having studied at length and the depth I have, that I realise that the crimes I'm looking at could well be his. Yes, I think I've got into his head.
Mrs. Sewell, found battered in a cemetery in Bakewell, Derbyshire, died in hospital 2 days later. Stephen Downing was convicted in 1974 for killing Wendy Sewell, but that was overturned in 2002. That's another very famous murder which created national headlines. You think that could also be the work of Peter Sutcliffe?
Yes, I obtained a copy of the pathologist's report around about the 10th of December last year, and there is clear evidence, which was never put to the original jury or since, that Wendy had been garroted. There were clear signs of bruising on her Adam's apple, and also in the deep part of her neck muscles.
And does that go along in terms of history and stereotypical crimes of Sutcliffe with what he used to do to his victims?
The actual garroting method is identical to a pathologist's report I read on Gloria Booth, which occurred in 1971 in South Ruislip.
Right. And so what you're doing is you're looking for trends. You're saying, well, this is what Sutcliffe did to one of his victims that we know is a Sutcliffe victim, and this is what happened to another woman in an unsolved case where Sutcliffe was nearby, and therefore there is a likelihood, because there aren't many mass murderers roaming through Norfolk, if any, so the likelihood is that Peter Sutcliffe was the perpetrator.
With regard to the headless body, in the Jean Jordan case where Sutcliffe murdered her in Manchester in October 1977, he went back a week later and in a frenzied attack tried to hacksaw her head off to make it look like a mystery.
So it shows that Sutcliffe in the past has tried to get rid of the head of a victim, and therefore that strengthens your case that he was responsible for the headless body at Cockley Cly. Just further to that as well, because that is interesting, he was nearby, he was in Cambridgeshire, you said, at the time. Have you got any more evidence to back this up?
The evidence is he actually stopped overnight at Waterbeach Barracks on or around the 10th, 11th of August 1974, and the pathologist deduced that this young woman met her fate during the 7th to the 14th of August that year.
Do you think the police should really have a look into this again? They should re-interview Peter Sutcliffe, and they should talk about some of these cases that you're bringing forward to see if they can throw any more light on the new information. I'm not going to say evidence, but the new information that you're bringing to our attention.
From the negative response I've received from several police forces to date, I think the only way forward is for the victims' relatives to form an alliance together with their local MPs and lobby Parliament.
Why do you think you have got that negative response?
I don't actually know, because I served from 1966 to 1994. Most of my work was intelligence-based, and there are clear parameters in these attacks whereby very few people could have committed those particular crimes.
Let's talk about why you've decided to investigate this area, because it's not perceived as normal as a hobby to go around and start digging up old murder files and reading them. But I understand that you decided to do this after your wife confided in you that she was almost abducted as a child.
Yes, my wife was actually just turned 15 but looked 10, and she was out cycling near St Neots in Cambridgeshire in the spring of 1971 when a man tried to abduct her in a road adjacent to the main A1, which is very significant to the April Fab and Jeanette Tate abduction methods.
April Fab is still a crime that many people in Norfolk talk about and they think of. Many years have passed since April Fab went missing. Her body was never found. Prominent members of her family have now passed on. Do you think that it's still worth raking up the past? Is it still worth going over the events of many decades ago in the hope that you can identify the perpetrator when the likelihood is that perpetrator is no longer with us?
In the cases I've looked at, the perpetrator definitely is with us, i.e. they've been locked up, both Robert Black, the one I was talking about just now, and Peter Sutcliffe.
How chilling is it that your wife may or may not have come into contact with such a notorious murderer as Mr. Black?
All I can say is my wife is now approaching her late 50s, and it's taken till last year for her actually to overcome the fear every time she sees a vehicle with the number 777 in the number plate, which is the minivan on the occasion in question.
And has there been any evidence that has actually linked that back to Black, and has it ever been confirmed that it was indeed his vehicle that approached your wife?
I cannot actually establish that, but by the nature and method, which was identical, as I said, to the other two girls, and also to the Jennifer Cardy and Northern Ireland murder, where the girls were attacked on bicycles in a specific manner, this was very, very similar.
I wonder, Chris, if you should be applauded and also encouraged in the work that you're doing, because you are using old police methods to try and draw themes, and from those themes you're looking for people who are responsible. The reality is, with a fresh wave of crimes that are committed every single year, the police don't really have that much opportunity to reinvestigate old cases. Of course, there is a department that's still doing it in Norfolk, but it's very hard to go back over old cases. Witnesses are no longer with us, or their memories are a little bit ropey of exactly what happened. Do you think more effort needs to be put towards trying to get to the bottom of some of these notorious, grisly, horrific, horrendous murders which shocked us all at the time, but now, through time, maybe those scars have begun to heal?
Well, for the people left behind, the relatives, albeit some of these crimes were 40 years ago, they're still fresh today as they were then, and I believe that if if there's no suspect in a case, to actually put one forward and run it alongside the original investigation material, it's quite probable that an end result could be achieved.
How consuming is this? Because you have to wade through so much information, and you really have to get to the bottom of a case. You've got to look at it from multiple angles, and then you've got to look at other cases to be able to evaluate it against. I imagine for you, and I know that you're retired, but this really was a rather dark hobby, but at the same time it must have become an obsession, a passion, insert your own word.
It's certainly a passion. My full reason for doing that is to try and put closure to the relatives of the people left behind, and they seem to have been forgotten.
Yes. That's a fair point. You had many years in the constabulary down here, including time as a Royal Protection Officer. Tell me, what was it like being in such a prominent position inside the force in Norfolk?
Well, when I did Royal Protection from the late 1960s to the early 1980s, the only weapon we had was a lump of wood, which was the truncheon, and just our eyes and ears to see if there was any movement towards the royal household.
They're slightly better protected these days. I just wonder, with the pressures on modern policing, with so many resources now being diverted to the road police, transport police, to having to fill in forms, that what we've gone away from is some of the old-fashioned policing methods, which was to dig over old crimes like this and to reinvestigate them and to bring them up in the hope that we would have a successful conclusion. And I wonder if the lesson from what you're telling us this morning is we need to go back to the old-fashioned policing methods, and we do need to look again at some of these cases which we think are long gone, are really dead and buried, forgive that awful phrase, in relation to what we're talking about, and actually look at them again with fresh eyes and say, what can we learn from old evidence but with a fresh perspective?
Yes, the role of a police officer is to have an inquiring mind. Technology certainly assists, but it does not take away from the person who can actually evaluate. Old policing methods are still the same today, it's just the technology we have is different.
What is your final message to Norfolk Police, to those listening in Norfolk, and especially those, and I know there are a few who listen to this programme, who in the past have been touched by murder in their family, and very sadly those murders, they've never found the person who was responsible for taking that life. What's your message to all those people listening this morning with intrigue to what you're saying?
When you're looking at a cold case, then look at every eventuality, any scrap of information, because that could be the one piece in the jigsaw to finally fit the puzzle.
That's retired Norfolk Police Officer Chris Clark.